President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call in relation to the motion to proceed to calendar number 302, H.R. 7148.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to be permitted to complete my remarks before the vote begins.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to vote to end debate on the motion to proceed to the six-bill package of appropriations legislation sent to us by the House of Representatives. These are fiscally responsible funding bills that reflect months of hard work and deliberation and contributions from members of both parties and on both sides of the Capitol. I would like to take a few moments to highlight some of the key aspects of these bills. Let's begin with the funding for the Department of Defense. This legislation provides U.S. military services with the funding needed to deter China and Russia, supports our service members and their families, and strengthens the defense industrial base. It addresses major funding gaps across the board, such as in shipbuilding. The bill provides a critical down payment toward an additional DDG-51, the workhorse of the U.S. surface fleet, and invest in additional Columbia and Virginia-class submarines. Mr. President, the bill also provides multi-year procurement authority for critical munitions production, a priority for the President. It funds drone and counter-drone technologies, which, as we've learned in both Ukraine and Israel, are increasingly changing the nature of the battlefield. And it contains security cooperation with close allies and partners whose growing defense capabilities are force multipliers for the United States and contribute to the deterrence of shared adversaries. This is especially true of our NATO allies, who are increasing their own domestic levels of military investment at the push and encouragement of President Trump, and appropriately so. Finally, the defense bill invests in our most precious asset, the men and women of our armed forces. The bill fully funds the 3.8% pay raise for service members and the additional pay raise for our junior enlisted service members, showing our commitment to their readiness, well-being, and mission success. The second bill is the National Security, Department of State, and Related Programs Bill. It used to be known as the State Foreign Operations Bill. It contains security assistance for key allies and partners, including Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Taiwan, and the Philippines. The bill also supports important global health programs. It continues support for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, known as PEPFAR, which has saved a remarkable 26 million lives since 2003, including the lives of 8 million babies born to HIV-infected mothers. Mr. President, it's difficult for me to contemplate another global health program, and we have many good ones, that has had more of a positive impact than PEPFAR. In many ways, I think it was President George W. Bush's greatest legacy. Turning to the labor HHS bill, this appropriations would prioritize funding to help make Americans healthier, and it robustly funds life-saving biomedical research. This has been a top priority of mine, and I know of many other members as well, including the subcommittee chair, Shelley Moore Capito, and her ranking member, Tammy Baldwin. Funding for NIH is not decreased as was proposed in the administration's budget. Rather, it is increased by $415 million, including increases of $100 million for Alzheimer's research and $10 million more for diabetes research, with a focus on type 1 diabetes. This bill also makes critical investments in our nation's children and families and invests in America's workforce. It includes funding for child care programs to help low-income working families and for apprenticeship programs to help us reach the goal of 1 million new active apprentices. The bill also includes more funding for low-income heating assistance, which is absolutely crucial for states like Maine and is an issue that I have worked for years on with my Democratic colleague, Jack Reed of Rhode Island. The Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill focuses on our most pressing transportation challenges, including modernizing our nation's outdated air traffic system, and I give Secretary Duffy a great deal of credit for coming up with a workable, much-needed plan in that area. It would also address the air traffic controller shortage and provides a pay raise there as well. The bill invests in critical infrastructure like our roads, bridges, ports, and rail. At the same time, the appropriations will continue to fully fund existing rental assistance for more than 4.6 million households to ensure that seniors, the disabled individuals, and working families who currently receive such assistance are not put at risk of homelessness. The Financial Services and General Government Bill funds core government functions. It increases funding for taxpayer services at the IRS, reallocates resources to strengthen court security, and helps keep our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., safe for both residents and visitors. Mr. President, as the Vice Chair of the committee has mentioned, there has understandably been a great deal of attention focused on the Homeland Security portion of the package, given the events of the past week. The horrific shooting death of Alex Petrie must be thoroughly and impartially investigated, and President Trump has promised that it will be investigated both impartially and thoroughly. The Homeland Security funding bill includes important provisions that we put in during the negotiations that would make such incidences less likely to occur. For example, it includes $20 million for body-worn cameras, which help to protect both law enforcement officials and those with whom they are interacting. It includes $2 million to ensure that training requirements include how to de-escalate an encounter with protesters. Yet another important provision of the bill empowers the Inspector General to review and investigate detention centers. These are all critical reforms, but it does not mean that we cannot do more. But to do more, Mr. President, we need to get onto the bill so that we can make the critical decisions that are being negotiated by leadership in both the House and the Senate and the White House as to how we proceed. Do we split off the Homeland Security bill and pass the other 5, and put Homeland Security on a continuing resolution, which will, by the way, delay implementation of the 3 reforms that I just discussed? Or do we try to amend that part of the bill with the agreed upon additional precautions and safeguards? Can't do that if we don't get onto the package. It's also worth noting, Mr. President, that more than 80% of the funding in the Homeland Security bill is for non-immigration and border security functions. For example, 35% of the funding in the Homeland Security bill is for FEMA. And think about what FEMA is doing on the ground right now due to this horrific storm that we have experienced. It includes $35 billion for FEMA to help state and local governments prepared to respond to disasters, including funding for programs that help local law enforcement and our firefighters that are so important. It includes funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program that helps organizations like synagogues, churches, temples, and mosques protect themselves from terrorism. Mr. President, another important component of this bill supports our Coast Guard. Think of our Coast Guard personnel out in this terrible weather, being available to rescue our fishermen, our lobstermen, or others who are in trouble. The Coast Guard provides critical safety, security, and stewardship functions from Maine to the Caribbean to the Arctic and myriad places in between. The bill provides funding to secure our borders and to stop the flow of illegal drugs, money, weapons, and people being trafficked into our country by cartels and transnational criminal organizations. It includes funding for TSA to help keep Americans safe while they travel, as well as funding for a 3.8% pay raise for air traffic controllers to help address the serious workforce shortage that also can affect air safety. Mr. President, my hope is that we can come up with an agreement that allows us to proceed to this bill and to provide some additional safeguards. And those negotiations are underway right now. But if we don't get on to this package, we cannot change this package. And I think that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle need to recognize and acknowledge that. So I want to end by noting the tremendous work of the full committee staff, my staff, and Senator Murray's staff. I particularly want to acknowledge the hard work of Betsy McDonald, who has worked night and day as the staff director. I want to thank our subcommittee chairs and ranking members and their staff, who have worked so diligently and are so dedicated. I know the conversations are continuing even as we speak between the administration and Congress on how to complete action on the Homeland Security portion of this package. This morning's vote is about taking the first step, not the final step, to consider the package on the Senate floor. So I urge my colleagues to support cloture on the motion to proceed to this vital appropriations package. Thank you, Mr. President.